I wanted to get this video to you. It's about the Temple Grandin and the Do You Speak American, and I've kind of combined both classes because I was looking for some overall themes. I took a lot of notes. I decided that there's more stuff than I could probably say, but I wanted to get this video out. Temple Grandin, wonderful response to it. Some of you had never seen it. I think it's very good for kids, maybe late elementary on up, certainly not kindergarten. But the idea that Temple Grandin persisted, her mother persisted at first because Temple didn't know. The idea of autism was totally misunderstood and cruelly treated. I mean, they wanted to institutionalize her. But this is a good pattern for multicultural or diversity, however you want to look at it. That which we encounter, which we do not understand, we tend to put it aside. We go on that defensive. We either ignore it or we say, okay, put that kid aside. They have to go into an institution. They're never going to learn to read or write, or they're never going to progress in society. And we totally dismiss the intellectual. I was a little, one thing that occurred to me was that near the end of the video, the movie, when the scientist was up there talking about autism and had this theory based on supposedly on science, is sometimes we trust scientists with things and they may be wrong in their initial approach, because you can't just look at things into very intellectual. You have to know the person. You have to know Temple Grandin, and really see her holistically, not just see the autistic behavior, but see everything about her. And her mother, I think, knew that, and because she persisted in making her pay attention, teaching her, and Temple said this, that you have to break that pattern of repetition that she was engaged in. That's part of autism, but it can be dealt with. You have to teach differently. We always talk about that, and then usually when it comes time to teach and there's a lot of pressure, we all resort to the rote memorization or something very mechanical, and everybody has to do it because we want to guarantee some minimal result or something. But I was thinking Temple Grandin is a really good example of how you have to adjust, how you have to look at the person, not only, and I don't always buy into learning styles, but you have to see what stimulus is going to work with that student, whether it's special education or a gifted student or whatever. Okay. I know in teaching English as a second language or teaching foreign languages, there's a series of historical ways they've taught it. And one was rote memorization, repeat after me. And right now that kills interest in learning a second language. French and Spanish and German, common languages that are taught in foreign language in the United States, are very interesting and can be taught in ways that will stimulate students. And that's very important. At the same time, I'm going to morph over to the other part about Do You Speak American English, is that several of you noted, and I noted that Stephanie mentioned in my second section, mentioned about Gullah. And these are individuals that are descendants of African Americans, or might have been slaves. I don't know the exact history of all of them, that lived along the coastal islands in the Carolinas. And they speak a thing called Gullah or Geechee, I think you mentioned. I happen to have some books on this. I have the New Testament. And if you'll look at how it's spelled, New Testament. And I'm just going to read a tiny bit here. I'm not trying to convert anybody, but I think it's here is the statement in Gullah: for whosoever shall save his life, will save his life, shall lose it, but whosoever shall lose his life for my sake, the same shall save it. Here it is in Gullah. forgive me, I'm not very good at Gullah, but I'm reading it. This whole gospel is written in Gullah. Jesus tell them all say, if a person one for come with me, he must don't do just wa in one for no more. You have to tote the cross and follow me every day. When you listen to this quietly, you can actually figure out that's what it says. You must carry your cross. Sorry, I've had a cold. I hate colds. And so this is beautiful. But if you read it to people very much, you get really irritated because it sounds like English. It's a little bit off. Well, I really have a cold. See, I love online because I can't give you my cold. Okay, but I've had a lot of people borrow this, especially kids who are fairly religious but really interested in ESL. And this is a language spoken in the United States. It's called Kichi or Gullah. Look it up, Gullah. And you mentioned you had students in your class that speak Gullah. How wonderful. I've never met anybody that. I remember a movie a long time ago with John Voight back in the 80s where he taught students that spoke Gullah. Anyhow, but the interesting thing about Temple Grandin and Do You Speak American is you're exposed to profound differences in the way people behave, mainly in their language, sometimes in their behavior. Stephanie, you mentioned Popcorn Sutton from that little clip, the guy sells whiskey. I also wrote down to Shane, you mentioned your students give you slang terms like basic, visco, VSCO, salty and spicy is a term, goat, lit. I have to look all these up. I know goat with all capital letters means something. Sometimes you have to be careful because some of these, I've seen people use them on Facebook and then you realize, oh, that's really not a nice thing to say. But they thought it was they said something and then they realized, oh, and they erased it because they realized it had a bad word in it or really had a bad meaning as a slang term. So you always have to be careful as a teacher. But we can explore individuals and their behavior, like Temple Grandin, gifted kids. One thing I want to leave you with Temple Grandin, it really struck me, is different, not less. You remember that term. They're different, but they're not less. Same thing for any kid in your class. And here's one thing that I want to mention. I heard this from an old monk years ago, and it was in a church. Sorry, I'm being a little churchy here, but I was in he was in a church, and there was a child with Down syndrome, or had Downs. And what was interesting was they were talking about gifts, and they said, "What gift? What's your gift?" Well, one lady said, "Well, I can sing, in church. That's my gift." Another one said, "I can speak 3 languages and help people." And then they asked the child, and they said, "Well, what's your gift, Billy?" And Billy waited, and he said, "Well, I'm a Downs child." And people suddenly, and I thought when I heard it, I thought, oh my gosh, of course. Temple Grandin, however you say it, has autism or is autistic. I know I had to be careful about that. But the very condition that people look at her for or call it a syndrome and are negative about, that very thing is the gift. I always think, what's my gift? Well, I try to be funny sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't work out. But, each of us has a gift. And that's when we look at special education kids, any kid, gifted kids, whatever it is. I don't like that term normal. I remember it came up in conversation. What is normal? You're not normal, abnormal. Don't like it. What is normal? When we deal with diversity, we're not trying to norm everybody out. So I think that's very important. other things that came to mind, and give me just a minute. I'm not going to talk as long, mainly because I can't, but at least now I can talk. I wasn't able to talk for a couple of days. And I apologize being a little slow to get around to these. I did read them, but it's just getting around to making the video. I think that with the video, I mean, with the stuff about do you speak American, and I noticed several of you. It was Zaida or Jorge in my second class, Izquierdo. You know, he mentioned, and I had other people mention, whether kids speak Appalachian or kids speak a dialect from or a version of Spanish from Central America, or they speak a Mayan language. Really interesting stuff, fascinating stuff. And it's so interesting to explore language. And the idea I had was, wouldn't it be interesting to make a little map of the United States? And actual linguists do this, you know, the scholarly linguists that study language, and they'll have the United States divided up. Same thing with Latin America or any place in the world. You can divide it up and study the language and note certain key words, rather than have a word, you know, saying they speak Middle American or they speak Southern American or Appalachian English. You can have that area mapped out, but you can actually have certain words in there, like the word to carry something. I love the Appalachian because I speak some of it because my ancestors came from Kentucky in that area. So, for instance, I can remember my own father's voice when I was growing up, and he would say, "I reckon." He was always saying, "I reckon. I reckon we could do that," you know. Or he'd say, "Hollering. What you hollering about? I'll holler at you. I'll tell you." He'd say, "Holler." Oh, it's just oh God, it's not a fur way down the road. It's either he'd say it's a stone's throw, or it's just past. And some people use the term old timey. I've seen that in Nebraska, and I heard that and I said, wow, I never heard people use that, but they do in Appalachia. That's an old timey house, like an old time house. And that stuff is so interesting. Even looking at differences between what people speak like in Omaha versus central Nebraska versus international English, you know, or you could do it with Chinese. You could do it with French in different countries. I only know English, though, for the most part. So, but you could do a map, and you could have kids discover things about language. And the reason I mention this is because we always want to get kids to read and write, but if they observed more and they observed language more, they'd be more interested in it. And one of the tough things to get kids to write is dialogue. Do people really speak that way? To actually have them practice. You know, we always teach the 5-paragraph essay. That's really not very exciting. I've never seen a 5-paragraph essay for sale in a store. It has no monetary value at all. I'm defending it as a good basis for logic and thinking and stuff, but it doesn't excite people. When we read books and stuff, that's when we get excited about reading. And when we write, and we write interesting stories or tell interesting stories, that's how William Faulkner started out in Mississippi. He sat around there, everybody told stories, and he became a writer, and he internalized the dialogue, the language. So you can see the incredible advantages he came up with. People outside my door, it makes me kind of creepy sounding. So Temple Grandin is a wonderful moral story about love, persistence, about how people are cruel to those that are different. And then also Temple Grandin teaches us that there's so many different ways to be a human being, to behave as a human being. And it's another culture. I read once somebody had written a book about autism where they actually talked about what it was like to perceive things. And if you remember the beginning at Temple Grandin, she got off the plane. It was like it's on fire because it's so warm outside. She literally saw flames. I think that's kind of in imagery there. And the lady I'd read about, I think it's from Australia, and she wrote about her metaphor or her visual perception is that when she looked at grass, she saw fire, like the flames coming up from grass. So grass wasn't grass to her, it was a threat. Waving grass was flames. And that would never appear it would never occur to me to even think of grass as something on fire or hot. I don't know what exactly the circumstances, but it meant that her perception of the world was so very different than mine, you know, and that's where we get, you know, I realize if we were to go and talk about other issues that impact people, depression, PTSD, and things like that, it could really be enlightening in terms of teaching us how to deal with people that have a different or a changed way of looking at the world. I just think it's so rich, and I see Temple Grandin as a great starting point for this. And in terms of language, do you speak American? I love the accents. I like to listen to people on the radio, and I hear them say certain syllables a little differently. Now I think they're not from here. They've learned to speak Middle English or even television English or news people English, but they still retain a little difference. There's little variance there, and only a native speaker can really listen for that kind of stuff. Sorry, I'm about to sneeze again. Well, anyhow, as I get over my cold, I want to thank you. I'm going to be doing more. This is for both classes, this particular one. And I want to thank both of you for your discussions. I didn't reply in detail to everything, but I just wanted to kind of hit the high points and move on, so you do get a feedback from me. So thank you, and I encourage you to use these for ideas for lessons, you know, about how to teach multiculturally, but not sit around talking about diversity and multiculturalism as a general concept. Because most of the time it doesn't interest people. They like variety. They like excitement. Thank you.